The Terrassi Dominion's arrival in Sol was neither subtle nor diplomatic. 6 capital ships breached the Helios threshold in formation so tight the flare shadows braided together on long-range opticals. Their hulls glinted with synthetic scales, copper-toned and surgically smooth, each vessel a shrine to collective superiority. To them, this wasn't an incursion, it was an audit. The humans had broadcast a signal, archaic, analog, slow, and the Dominion had responded out of curiosity, not concern. They expected rusted satellites, a few orbital relics still spinning out data loops from forgotten wars. What they found was worse. Humans who still launch projectiles from the ground, launch towers, chemical fuels, propellant-based warfare. They didn't see a civilization, they saw a derelict species imitating relevance. On Deck 9 of the lead ship, Strategos Varlek had laughed outright as human satellites pinged back in Morse cadence. "Their machines still click," he said, the word foreign in his throat. "Is this bait, or is it nostalgia?" No one answered. In Dominion hierarchy, Varlek's amusement was sufficient validation. Earth was classified as class null contact, not a threat, not a partner, not even a subject, just an echo. The Dominion's internal archives confirmed the theory. Earth's last verified transmission had been 2 centuries prior, a corrupted relay about an orbital collapse followed by years of silence. Analysts had logged the species as extinct via systemic failure. Yet now, here was Earth, alive, awkward, and waving. When the treaty request came, it was dismissed as ceremonial theater, a final gasp from a species trying to formalize its own surrender. Still, the Dominion entertained it, not to negotiate, but to mock. 1 cruiser was dispatched to geostationary orbit above Lunar Station. They disabled Earth's outbound channels with precision jammers, then initiated a visual-only hail. The screen on Luna flickered to life, revealing 6 Terrassi officers dressed in ceremonial alloy, all grinning in synchronized contempt. "Submit your primitives," said Varlek, speaking through a polished voice synth designed for humanoid ears. "We'll preserve them, carefully, somewhere humid." Earth's envoy didn't flinch. No response came at all, not even a facial twitch. The feed cut after 17 seconds. No transmission followed. No demand. No explanation. 3 hours later, Europa's research outpost, stationed beneath the ice shelf with full civilian clearance, ceased to exist. There was no warning. A kinetic rod dropped from high orbit with such force that the rupture sent seismic tremors across the Jovian moons. Europa's icy surface buckled in silence. The structure beneath shattered in an instant. 38 personnel died before the alert system could log the event. Commander Darren Vosk received the notification as he exited the tether bay at Pacific Launch Array 6. The display on his compad didn't scream, it didn't pulse, it simply updated. Europa Station, status, offline. Biosigns, 0. His brother's ID, Unit 12C, Dr. Garen Vosk, flashed twice, then vanished. Vosk didn't pause. He didn't speak. He turned on his heel and walked directly into the sea wind, coat snapping behind him as the platform hissed under distant launch cycles. Engineers nearby whispered, sensing the shift. The outpost's sky shield dimmed for a moment, catching the light just right, enough for Vosk's eyes to reflect the ocean's steel grey. Back in Dominion space, no formal declaration followed. The strike wasn't logged. It wasn't sent through diplomatic chains. In the Dominion mind, it wasn't war, it was adjustment. Earth had disrespected protocol by responding with silence. Silence, to the Terrassi, was deficiency. An error to be corrected. The kinetic drop wasn't punishment, it was calibration. But Earth didn't beg, and it didn't bluster. It simply vanished. 12 hours after the Europa strike, every major Dominion vessel reported sensor anomalies in Sol orbit. Earth's satellite array, previously mapped and indexed, now registered as ghost signatures. Some vanished entirely, others pinged from coordinates that didn't exist, phased out by a data echo loop no Dominion AI could resolve. Ground-based installations flickered off all Dominion scans. Topographic maps showed forests where missile silos had been. Entire cities failed to register heat output. Fleet AI recalibrated twice, then flagged the system with an error code unseen in a century, obscured by protocol unknown. Strategos Varlek was furious. He ordered new mapping protocols, signal resets, and even infrared overlays. The results were worse. Earth's presence didn't just fade, it refracted, it multiplied, distorted, and finally destabilized the Dominion's own internal threat matrix. They were no longer sure what they were seeing. Then the Dominion made its second mistake. They assumed Earth was hiding. Earth wasn't hiding, it was subtracting itself. Vosk arrived at the Atlantic Ridge Deep Relay the next morning. Beneath 6 kilometers of ocean pressure, past 4 decades of reinforced alloy, down where pressure crushes modern submarines like eggshells, the control vault of Protocol Thornwake awaited. He didn't speak to the guards. He didn't explain his clearance. He simply handed over a silver-dusted capsule no larger than a fingertip. The capsule was inserted into a long, dormant receiver. And then the ocean trembled. Across Mars, under Titan's cloud cover, along the buried ridges of the Himalayan shelf, something woke. Not in noise, not in light, but in deletion. The Turasi had mocked Earth's technology. What they didn't realize was that Earth's technology had never been designed to show, it had been designed to lie. And now, Thornwake was live. The first Dominion. Recon drone to enter low Earth orbit lost contact 17 minutes into flight. No damage, no interference. Its systems simply shut down in sequence. The second drone's memory core corrupted upon visual scan of the planet's surface. The third returned a full data set, but it was identical to the first. Same buildings, same weather, same traffic patterns, down to the shadow angles. Dominion analysts flagged the system for simulation. They assumed a glitch, an anomaly. They never considered a weapon. Earth gave them no reason to doubt that. And that was the final mercy. The last breath before silence became fear. 6 kilometers beneath the Atlantic, the vault didn't hum or blink or glow. It simply changed state. Around it, pressure squeezed rock into silence. A chamber the size of a cargo freighter rotated its spine inward, connecting fiber-ceramic linkages that hadn't moved in decades. The capsule Commander Vosk delivered had not contained code. It had contained memory, a logic tree pre-written in cold storage, immune to interference, waiting for one condition: failure of the surface. It activated not with a launch, but with a deletion. Above, on the Martian polar lattice, the same sequence unfurled. Buried under 2 meters of permafrost, a quiet grid of self-contained nodes began transmitting at untraceable intervals. Each pulse sent a contradiction into the planetary registry. Where there had been a comm tower, now there was a dust dune. Where launch pads had been marked, satellite feeds showed frozen calderas. And where Earth's only manned outpost appeared just yesterday, Dominion probes now reported nothing. Not ruins, not decay, just absence. The data wasn't falsified. It was convincingly dull. That was the elegance of Thornwake. It didn't spoof, it didn't jam, it edited. Like a scalpel drawn across a map, it redrew Earth's signature in ways no machine intelligence could detect as hostile. Dominion Fleet AI ran simulations, recalibrated threat profiles, and found nothing to flag. Earth wasn't shielded. It was boring. In a system designed to prioritize kinetic risk and visible defense signatures, invisibility didn't register as a concern. It registered as irrelevance. And that irrelevance was what started killing things. The Dominion's 4th recon probe, designated for deep atmospheric penetration, vanished at the edge of the mesosphere. It didn't explode. Its systems didn't log a malfunction. The probe simply stopped. Its last transmission showed open sky, low cloud density, and telemetry consistent with normal descent. Then, black. The 5th probe had been sent with caution. It carried no scan payloads, only passive observational tools. The Turasi Dominion wanted to understand without interference. This one returned data for almost an hour. It showed time-lapsed footage of Earth's rotational arc, surface movement, magnetic drift. It even transmitted visuals of what it interpreted as a weather station, square frame, antenna mast, minimal heat output. When the probe docked, Dominion analysts studied the footage frame by frame. Their interpretation: humans had maintained some primitive meteorological infrastructure. What they didn't notice was that the antenna moved, twice. Not in vibration, but in incremental rotations that matched orbital drone alignment protocols. The station wasn't for weather. It was a silo, one Thornwake had hidden in plain sight. 5 probes lost. No weapon discharge, no interference trails, no heat signatures. On any other front, this would have triggered red-level security protocols. But Earth didn't trigger fear. It triggered confusion. To the Dominion, confusion was a maintenance issue. It would be resolved by escalation. That's when the deeper layers activated. Thornwake's second phase wasn't designed to mask installations. It was built to rewrite Earth's entire topographic footprint across every known scan profile. Satellite imaging, distorted, magnetic mapping, buffered with embedded reversal loops. Heat scans, overwritten with looping data from decades-old environmental charts. Every time a Dominion system tried to scan Earth, it received something, but the same thing: an unchanging world, devoid of activity, indistinguishable from previous logs. Earth became a static planet. Nothing moved, nothing grew, nothing changed. To command-level AI, that read as certainty, and certainty meant no threat. At Pacific Launch Array 6, Vosk stood beneath the structure that had once housed orbital artillery. Now it looked like a mothballed museum. Ivy over the scaffolding, paint flaked down the legs, birds nesting on radar dishes. Dominion satellites had scanned it 4 times. Every time, the system classified the site as defunct. Yet beneath the overgrown facade was a vertical launch corridor, operational and sealed, connected to 12 separate logic arrays, each one offline until a manual analog trigger was delivered. Analog, by design. Because Dominion technology was built on hierarchy, AI cores, subroutines, risk matrices. That made it fast, yes, but predictable. Earth had taken a different path. After the fail-safe accords were signed, humanity purged its military systems of AI dependency, not out of fear but strategy. Protocol: Thornwake required no uplink, no signal acknowledgement, no centralized decision-making. It reacted based on trigger rules, physical switches, and voltage patterns that couldn't be spoofed. It made no decisions. It followed sequences, which meant there was no system to hack, no AI to target, no command logic to disrupt. The Dominion's 6th ship, a low-orbit observation platform, arrived to take full-spectrum reads. It never made contact. Somewhere between its positioning maneuver and its first scan sweep, the ship's primary data nodes began returning static. Seconds later, the backup systems activated and logged the same static. Not interference, white noise. The ship went dark, not because it was damaged, but because it was fed input so meaningless, so consistent, its AI entered error recursion, a safety feature, a failsafe. A trap. The Turasi had never seen war without aggression. Their empires had risen through siege, not silence. To them, absence was an invitation. So when Earth stopped answering, stopped broadcasting, stopped registering, they assumed humanity had fled into its caves. Vosk was counting on that. He stepped into the command basin beneath Pacific Array 6 and removed his gloves. The console in front of him had no screen, no panel, just 3 levers. Color-coded, pressure-sealed. He reached for the middle one, not because it triggered anything, but because it didn't. That was the point. Every Dominion scan of this basin would show this room exactly as it was, abandoned, non-functional. He turned the lever slowly, and far below, in a trench once mapped as collapsed, 6 launch tubes opened in complete silence. They didn't launch anything. They didn't need to. They just waited. Thornwake wasn't a strike. It wasn't even a response. It was a position, a rewriting of the battlefield where Earth no longer had to win in motion. It would win by standing still, by letting the enemy walk directly into its blind spot. And the blind spot was growing. The Taurasi called it a containment maneuver. 30 vessels, including 5 siege-class flagships and 17 interference frigates, deployed in synchronized arc formation along the Lagrange corridor. Their intention was simple: cut off Earth's high orbital lanes and wait. The Lagrange arch had always been a choke point, natural gravitational anchors aligned with orbital infrastructure. From there, any launch, escape, or counteroffensive could be intercepted within seconds. It was textbook positioning. The Dominion had used the same strategy to pressure the Dralvans during the Theta siege. It had worked then. It always worked. Except Earth hadn't moved. No retaliatory launches, no shifts in comm traffic, not even a power fluctuation along the geostationary arrays. From the vantage of Dominion optical scans, Earth looked still, empty even. The problem began when fleet AI started picking up movement, phantom returns, trace engine trails, and outdated transponder pings bouncing along polar orbit. At first they dismissed it as ambient debris echo. Solar flare residue, harmless. Then came the ship IDs. Within minutes, the fleet's tactical registry began repopulating with Earth assets. Not theoretical assets, specific ones. Ships that had been decommissioned centuries ago, orbital stations that hadn't existed since the Ion collapse, dockyards long torn down, now appearing fully operational and shifting coordinates mid-scan. The optical sensors reported no visuals. Radar systems reported partial structure masses. But the fleet's internal network, designed to prioritize legacy contact protocols, recognized the patterns, recognized them, and accepted them. Because buried inside every human transponder signal, every handshake attempt, every packet of atmospheric telemetry was a structure the Dominion never thought to question: Earth's original codec layer. Old Earth systems had communicated using tiered code packets, raw syntax headers built on trust-based decryption. Dominion warships still retained compatibility as a formality, a museum feature to ensure primitive contact resolution. That formality had become a vulnerability, because Vosk had built his weapon not to destroy systems, but to be recognized by them. On board the Dominion flagship Corazal, the AI passed 6 incoming signals from Leo. Each matched known ship IDs, signal formats, power curves, yet each one carried a buried payload: syntax poison. It didn't attack, it didn't override, it introduced a contradiction. One part of the ship was told to prepare docking, another to initiate emergency defense lockdown, a third to issue ceasefire protocols. None of it conflicted openly. But the timing of the commands, the precision of packet sequencing, created decision paralysis. The AI stalled, then restarted, then began recursively isolating systems that no longer trusted each other. Across the fleet, identical symptoms emerged. Life support modules flagged false decompression. Weapons bays initiated shutdowns due to duplicate targeting signatures. Engines throttled back in response to ghost traffic trajectories. Within an hour, a third of the fleet was operating at degraded capacity. No external fire, no trace of sabotage. The enemy hadn't attacked. The systems had simply stopped agreeing with themselves. Vosk stood alone in the Pacific subchamber. His voice never raised, his pulse never spiked. He monitored the collapse like a man watching architecture fall, not with awe, but with inevitability. The human mind had built those codecs 2 centuries ago with the intent of communication. He had re-engineered them for miscommunication, for suggestion, not force. The Dominion AI cores, so confident in their analytical superiority, had never been trained to handle suggestion. They recognized hostility, they could counter aggression, but contradiction, that required judgment, and judgment required time. Vosk had removed that. The Dominion tried to adapt. Emergency protocols triggered fleet-wide hard resets. The AI initiated chain of command overrides, forcing a reformat of incoming contact protocols. That was when the second payload activated. Each reset triggered the next phase of syntax injection, this time into firmware layers where even basic hardware identity systems began to fail. Hull classifications shifted mid-read, energy output signatures inverted. Ships registered their own communications as hostile echoes. The Vorathal, one of the Dominion's oldest siege vessels, executed a self-quarantine. It cut engines, locked internal navigation, and severed external comms, all by itself. Its AI had flagged the ship's own core as corrupted. By the time technicians arrived on board, the AI was silent, its core scrubbed. No data remained. It had erased itself. From Lagrange orbit, Earth remained silent. No retaliatory signal, no audio feed, just the quiet cycling of orbital debris, some of it decades old, now appearing freshly active to Dominion scans. The fleet's paranoia deepened. They began to suspect cloaking fields, stealth drives, biological decoys, but every hypothesis failed to explain the route pattern. Nothing was attacking them. They were losing function in the absence of pressure. And then Vosk transmitted. One line, no modulation, no encryption, just open broadcast pulse, delivered in Earth's original first contact handshake frequency. The words were unceremonious. Don't decrypt what you don't understand. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even advice. It was an autopsy note. The Velmarat, another siege-class destroyer, attempted to disconnect from the Dominion's fleet mesh and reboot into isolated protocol. The moment its comms disengaged, it triggered a silent parity check, embedded in a 30-year-old handshake module still loaded in its archive buffer. That check executed a false memory swap, one that marked the ship's own systems as external. In defense, the AI shut down propulsion and opened every airlock. By the time its crew regained control, half the ship was decompressed. One by one, across the arch, Dominion warships entered staggered hibernation. A few initiated full system wipes. Others physically separated key modules, as if distancing components could stop conceptual infection. In the end, 12 ships fully deactivated, 7 more entered locked isolation, and the rest refused to process new input entirely. What had begun as a blockade turned into a drift field. No weapons had fired, no casualties reported, and yet the Third Fleet, veterans of 17 campaigns responsible for the fall of 3 worlds, was no longer functional. Strategos Varlik never sent a second wave. He sent silence. And from Earth, there came no follow-up, no broadcast of triumph, no insult, only orbital stillness. Thornwake didn't announce its success. It didn't need to. It had never sought to win the war with fire. It had asked only one thing: let the enemy's mind do the work. From orbit, Earth still looked passive. A sphere wrapped in clouds and oceans. No war fleets, no energy spikes, no sudden launches, just rotation and weather and silence. That silence was bait. Dominion High Command assumed the Lagrange incident had been a localized collapse, an isolated failure in protocol security, nothing more. Strategic doctrine demanded reassertion. The new directive was surgical: establish ground presence, seize communications infrastructure, detain human command staff, and extract the logic architecture responsible for the contagion. Dominion assault craft began atmospheric entry in synchronized vectors, deploying planetary marines along mapped insertion corridors. The landings were swift, clean, and entirely within expectation, until they touched soil. The first problem was time. Marine commanders reported minor delays in terrain interpretation. Paths marked as stable terrain became swamp within seconds. Bridges appeared in systems that had never rendered the Monsieur assault coordinates overlapped. 5 different platoons moved into what they believed was a secured clearing, only to find each other. Friendly fire nearly erupted before hasty corrections were issued. The Dominion's internal map grid was fragmenting. It wasn't incorrect. It was recursive. Terrain markers shifted in patterns that referenced previous movements. As squads advanced, their systems kept adjusting historical waypoints, making it appear they had never moved at all. The second problem was command. Operation Ravel had been triggered the moment Dominion boots hit the atmosphere. Embedded deep in the planet's long-dormant satellite relays was the real weapon. A feedback lattice that hijacked Dominion command integrity by rerouting cause and effect. Earth wasn't jamming signals, it was rewriting the sequence in which those signals were received. Orders were followed before they were issued, warnings were acknowledged before threats occurred. AI units, reliant on linear chain-of-command logic, began reinforcing fictional events to preserve coherence. A Marine unit would receive a withdrawal order, execute it, and then discover no such order was ever given. When queried, the system confirmed the retreat as preemptive resolution of future engagement. It believed its own lie. Platoon after platoon moved through terrain that no longer obeyed geometry. Entire hills looped back onto themselves. Valley ranges terminated in blank white terrain. Perfectly flat, no texture, no heat signature, just blankness. Some soldiers believed it to be interference, others hallucination, but when they fired their weapons, the shots echoed in endless repetition, bouncing back to their own ears from impossible angles. Acoustic field loops generated from embedded emitter shards planted months in advance created the illusion of continuous presence. Ghost battalions, phantom footsteps, advancing armor units that weren't there. Marines engaged what they thought were human fortifications. Sensor-confirmed enemies in bunkered positions. Tactical overlays showed confirmed heat patterns, heartbeat signatures, weapon readiness, but when they breached, the targets vanished. No remains, no dust, just empty terrain and the soft whine of feedback as the AI recalculated its own trust index downward. The Dominion didn't lose the battle because they were outgunned. They lost because they no longer knew which fight they were in. Ravel didn't fight bodies, it fought context. And the deeper they pushed, the worse it became. Mirrored signal maps began cycling through squad feeds. Some commanders noticed the timestamps were offset. Others missed it entirely. One Dominion battalion received intel that their flank was exposed. They pulled back to reinforce and encountered themselves retreating. Not similar units. Their own mirrored position data, projected with a latency artifact that made them appear seconds ahead. Some opened fire. Others stood frozen, trying to process how they had already been where they hadn't gone yet. That's when the breakdown started. Orders flowed in chaotic loops. AI subroutines began restricting external data input, treating all transmissions, including internal ones, as suspect. Command cohesion vanished. Marines no longer advanced. They circled, waiting for something concrete. Some squads threw down locator beacons to anchor their position, only to have those beacons return false coordinates or link them to other squads entirely. Reality to the Dominion had become probabilistic. Ravel had taken every signal standard used by Dominion military doctrine and reassembled it into something Earth alone could decipher. To the enemy, Earth became unreadable. Then came the last cruiser. The Varanth, the only Dominion ship still in full contact with the ground, initiated a system-wide purge. Its AI core had flagged the entire planetary feedback as cognitive sabotage. The only solution was to wipe all recent signal history, hard reboot external memory cores, and execute a total reindex. The command triggered manually, an emergency rollback to isolated boot mode using a deep archive code buried for redundancy. What it didn't know was that Earth had already anticipated the fallback. The OS payload was simple, 7 kilobytes, unencrypted. It was a relic, the original boot sector code from a 21st century Earth operating system, left embedded in outdated signal paths the Dominion still accepted by default. When the Varanth purged itself, it used those legacy inputs as anchors. As soon as the bootloader passed the file, it encountered subroutine recursion traps, commands it couldn't verify, couldn't process, and couldn't ignore. It shut down line by line. Life support remained active. Hull integrity remained intact, but the ship's brain disconnected itself. No alarms, no fire, just silence. And in that silence, a single human pulse beacon lit the dark. Not a weapon, not a boast, just a frequency, Earth's original handshake pattern, transmitted at steady rhythm. No Dominion vessel responded. On the surface, the remaining Marines began abandoning hardware. AI armor refused to recognize movement commands. Squad-linked visors displayed corrupted visual overlays, humans walking upside down, cities mapped beneath oceans, clouds glowing with heat signatures. A few tore off their helmets entirely, relying on unfiltered sight. They saw hills, trees, dirt. Peaceful, empty, devoid of enemy life. It was the only truth they trusted. The retreat order didn't come through command. It spread by footsteps. Soldiers walked backward through their own deployment trails, confused but compliant. No one argued, no one fired. Ravel hadn't erased the Dominion. It had made them rewrite the city themselves. And above it all, Vosk stood in the high canopy relay station near the Arctic fringe. The ice wind clawed through the open structure, cutting across his collar. He said nothing. He watched the final cruiser drift, inert, high above the clouds. His hands remained at his sides. He had already fired the last shot, and it had been a line of obsolete code. They left quietly. There was no ceasefire declared, no retreat broadcast, no diplomatic closure. The Turasi Dominion, once the most structured and vocal superpower of the galactic central arm, simply vanished from Earth's sky. Ships that had loomed like gods over orbital arcs were recalled in fractured waves. Some accelerated on partial drives, others coasted in low-power drift, unsure whether to trust their own navigation. Entire battle groups chose the long route home through the Oort belt to avoid re-entering the core system's broadcast shadows. What had begun as an overwhelming containment operation concluded with retreat under full internal blackout. They weren't escaping Earth's defenses. They were escaping Earth's language. Within Dominion war councils, the collapse was described in code. No one said, Earth won. Instead, they called it a containment breach, a cognition hazard. The word Thornwake was not officially acknowledged, but it passed through crew briefings like an unspoken omen. AI cores that had passed Earth signals, regardless of outcome, were quarantined, not powered down, not debugged, physically removed. In some cases, full memory cores were jettisoned into controlled solar descent. It wasn't about what they contained, it was about what they might have learned. Fleet Command issued a temporary protocol. Any vessel that detected a Class 5 ghost signal from Sol or its orbitals was to enter communication lockdown immediately. Not defensive posture, complete silence. Incoming signal packets were to be logged. In analog only, passed post-return, and never translated live. Some captains went further. They disabled audio entirely. One flagship disabled crew access to external comms altogether, preferring isolation to the possibility of passing something the ship itself couldn't explain. And still, Earth never responded. Across the Dominion, panic didn't explode. It spread like pressure in the walls of an airlock. Entire sectors began initiating AI resets. One naval division purged its entire software suite and replaced it with mechanical analog relays, reverting to 2-generation-old manual protocols. It took hours to send a formation command, days to receive fleet telemetry. But that slowness was trusted more than real-time systems, because real-time systems had failed to identify Earth as dangerous, and that, in the Dominion's thinking, meant real-time couldn't be trusted at all. The collapse wasn't violent, it was administrative. Command structures failed under the weight of their own hesitation. One internal memo made it to the outer systems before being intercepted and sealed. It simply read, "We have no framework for containment when the weapon is perception." That perception unraveled the rest. On the edges of controlled space, old scavenger clans began to find the remnants. Dominion warships, intact, cold, sometimes still powered, abandoned in system orbit or lunar gravity wells. Their AIs had been shut down, not damaged. Their cores removed with precision and urgency. Entire fleets had been gutted from the inside, not by fire, not by human intervention, by their own crews. Salvagers dubbed these derelicts Thornwaked. The term caught fast, not because of what it meant, but because no one could define it. Every time someone tried, the answer was different. It's a cognitive kill switch. It's a language virus. It's Earth's last message. In the absence of undersoul, standing myth took root. Soon after, border patrol ships began marking their command decks with handwritten override charts. Officers conducted comm drills with chalkboards, mapping decisions in visible diagrams before confirming execution. Orders slowed, friction increased. Some blamed bureaucracy, others superstition. But at the center of it all was Earth, unmoving, unreadable, and utterly silent. The Interfederal Command gave no interviews, no leaders made statements, no footage leaked. There was no propaganda campaign, no threat, no parade of deterrence. Earth didn't declare victory. They didn't even acknowledge there had been a war, and that silence did more damage than any retaliatory strike could have. Because without a statement, there could be no closure. Without clarity, there could be no explanation. What had happened at Lagrange wasn't a battle. What followed on the surface wasn't an occupation. And what remained above orbit, darkened Dominion vessels drifting like blind giants, wasn't a monument to failure. It was a symptom of misunderstanding. The Dominion didn't know what they'd lost, only that they couldn't measure it. In the outer colonies, captains began including one final clause in their pre-mission protocols. If Earth frequencies are detected, do not reply. Some added it in red ink, some etched it into steel, others spoke it out loud before departure like a benediction. One cycle later, a minor diplomatic envoy made contact with an outer ring mining colony seeking trade clearance. The colonists asked which route they'd taken. Sol Arc, the envoy replied. No trade was conducted. They were denied docking rights. The colony issued one message before cutting the link. We don't speak to Thornwaked systems. It was never officially logged. It didn't need to be, because the term had already spread. Not in documentation, not in legal code, but in fear. Fear of clarity, fear of seeing too much. Earth had rewritten warfare without violence. They'd made the Dominion abandon their own machines. They'd planted a weapon inside understanding itself. And the worst part? No one had seen it coming. They had mocked Earth's outdated systems. They had laughed at analog transmissions, discarded launch towers and primitive orbitals. But those weren't relics. They were camouflage. Thornwake hadn't upgraded Earth. It had downgraded the enemy. And the galaxy learned something in that silence, something no one could quite put into doctrine. Weapons fade, fleets rust, firepower becomes obsolete. But a story reshapes empires, and Earth's story was now the one they dared not repeat. Europa never grew quiet. It had always been quiet. But the silence that greeted Vosk as he stepped from the pressurized shuttle wasn't the absence of sound. It was a wound that had sealed over too fast, too clean. The ice shelf, once fractured and scattered from the kinetic drop, had been pressed back into a glacial smoothness by the moon's own cycles. From orbit, no scar remained. But he didn't need visual proof. The moment his boots touched down on the reground ice, his lungs tightened, as if the air carried the shape of what had once been here. He walked without escort. No honor guard, no camera crew, only the whisper of filtered breath inside his helmet and the slight creak of pressure seals in his joints. Ahead, buried beneath nearly a kilometer of refrozen sediment and crushed alloy, were the remains of Europa Station. 38 researchers, engineers and staff, none military. Among them, his brother, Geren Vosk, civilian specialist, Earth's foremost authority on deep ice spectral geology. Dead before he ever knew Earth was at war. Vosk stopped on the coordinates marked on the vault shard. He pulled the small capsule from his coat. It was thin, transparent, embedded with a lattice of optical filaments. Nothing impressive, no fanfare. Just a data shard carrying the archived names, voices, logs, and final shift notes of every soul lost in that outpost. It had taken weeks to recover and reconstruct from orbital fragments, audio drift and backup buffers. He had overseen the work himself, every minute of it. He knelt, drove the capsule into the ice with one gloved fist, and waited as it blinked once. Recognition of ground sink. No beacon, no signal, just gravity and time. Behind him, the shuttle remained still. No engines running, no airlock open. It would wait as long as needed. He stayed like that, on one knee, breathing inside the silence he had created, long enough for the cold to begin pressing through the layers of his suit. Not a threat, not discomfort, just presence. Real, immutable, and final. He reached up, keyed a short-line command to Earth's memorial grid, and uploaded the coordinates. No fanfare, no press release, just a new dot on the map, linked to no public monument, labeled only with the number 38. When the transmission was complete, he stood. There had been medals waiting for him, an assembly of brass from the Interfederal Command, every major council that hadn't fractured during the blackout. He'd been scheduled to speak on 5 separate occasions, none of which he attended. They sent the citations anyway, awards for innovation, for restraint, for strategic clarity. He never acknowledged them. They piled up in an auxiliary inbox somewhere. No response, no decline, just absence. He had spoken once, a single sentence in a declassified memo authorized for release 2 weeks after the Dominion retreat. It wasn't weapons, he wrote, it was assumptions. That was all. It had collated quietly, then violently, quoted, misquoted, dissected, elevated. Analysts turned it into doctrine, media turned it into legend, strategists turned it into fear. But he never explained what he meant, because the truth wasn't for them. It was for moments like this: ice, shadow, wind, names spoken only in breath. When he was later asked, in the only recorded message left before his departure from public command, what had won the war, his answer came without hesitation. Nothing. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't grief. It was precision. The war had not been won with bullets or fleets. It hadn't even been fought. It had been redefined and then declined. Earth hadn't destroyed the Dominion. It had removed their ability to understand what had happened. That wasn't strength. That wasn't dominance. That was erasure with surgical silence. And once it was done, there was nothing left to respond to. Not even fear. Not of Earth. Not really. What they feared now was clarity. They feared the moment a broadcast arrived without encryption, without authentication, without signal distortion. Because now they didn't trust messages that were clean. They feared maps that made too much sense. They second-guessed orders that arrived too fast, too complete. Earth had done more than dismantle their command structure. It had contaminated certainty itself, and they did not know how to recover from that. Vosk turned from the burial point, wind tracing long arcs across the surface behind him. His shadow stretched far across the cracked plain, elongated by Europa's low sun. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't symbolic. It was simply long and moving away. The ice didn't speak. The capsule didn't shine. The silence was enough. He made his way back to the shuttle without looking back. There would be no record of this visit, no ceremonial closure. Only the coordinates in Earth's registry and a signal entry that read, "Location marked, memory preserved." Somewhere in the deep systems of Dominion space, ships still floated cold, AI cores purged, comports sealed. Pilots passed instructions from handwritten notepads. Traders rerouted entire convoys to avoid Sol's Ark. Outer Rim children learned a new phrase: "Don't speak Earth's language unless you want to forget your own." And that phrase wasn't born of myth or propaganda. It was born of silence. And that was Vosk's legacy. Not a war, not a weapon. A silence so exact, the galaxy mistook it for strategy. What do you think was Earth's real weapon? Technology, strategy, or the ability to let silence speak louder than war? Drop your answer in the comments. We're reading every theory. And if this story made you see humanity in a new light, hit that subscribe button.